No. Ryan just came back with another bottle of Malort for me. I just picked that up actually right before this.
Well, you can have that all to yourself. Holy cow.
All right. Well, we are now live on Facebook. So welcome to the Digital Speakeasy, where we are all stuck at home still. So we're here to break up your day with some great conversation and maybe a cocktail or two. Also, always being responsible, of course. But this is for a great cause, so we are here. So before we get to our guests, let's talk about this great cause that we have. Everybody here has been affected in some way, shape, or form by this pandemic. So at the Digital Speakeasy, we teamed up with an amazing organization, the World Central Kitchen. This organization is headed by world-renowned chef Jose Andres. They are working across America to safely distribute fresh meals in communities that need support. The World Central Kitchen is also now activating restaurants to help meet the demand by providing jobs for their staff and meals for those in need. Since the start of all this, they have purchased over 5 million meals from local restaurants and delivered those meals directly to Americans in need. Their intention is that by working directly with those restaurants and providing demand for the restaurant business, that they can help get meals to people who need them while uplifting the restaurant industry. And they really need our help right now to keep the doors open. So here at the Digital Speakeasy, we wanted to do what we can. So we started doing this to break up the day, like I said, but also if you would like to donate to our cause, which is the real reason that we are here, Edrington is actually going to double match any dollar that you put in. So even if you only have a couple bucks, that will be ×3 and it quickly adds up. So if you can, we have a big goal. We're trying to raise $50,000 in the next 6 months to give a total donation of $150,000. So if you want to throw a couple bucks in the bucket, please visit our Facebook page. If you are on the Zoom or watching us on Facebook Live, we will put the link to donate in the comments. So like I said, give them a little visit, throw them a buck or two if you're able to. But now let's get to another reason why we're here, because we're here for the great cause, but after that, we need some great conversation, right? So today we have two incredible people on the show today. So let's get this show on the road. I would like to introduce to you our first guest, Ms. Peggy Noe Stevens. She is the world's first master bourbon taster, female bourbon master taster. She is the founder of Bourbon Women. And in the past year or so, she's been pretty busy because she not only became a Bourbon Hall of Famer, but she was also inducted this February of this year into Whiskey Magazine's Hall of Fame. So welcome to the show, Miss Peggy Noe Stevens.
Thank you, Lacey. I appreciate you all having me. Glad to be here.
I'm very excited to have you on the show, and I know a lot of other people are excited to hear from you. You know, kind of looking at your resume, you've had this beautiful evolution of a career. And I think, you know, to where the point you're at now, a lot of people you're seeing these different programs pop up with how to get into distilling and things like that. So I know a lot of people probably wanted to know how you got your start. And I did not know that your start came in hotels. Did you always want to be in the hospitality industry?
You know, it's funny. I honestly was, I guess after graduation, I graduated from the University of Kentucky. I was like any college grad that just needed a job. And I had happened to have interned during college at the Hyatt Regency in Lexington. And after that internship, you know, I wasn't sure if I wanted to get into the hotel business or not because I had a PR degree. And so when I started looking for a job, I was really struggling, you know, to have somebody hire me because I had no experience, et cetera. And so basically what happened was that I ended up going back to Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm from, and interviewed with the Hyatt Regency in Louisville. And of course, they hired me on the spot because I had that internship. So it was really kind of out of a college kid's desperation to earn a little money. And, but I will tell you, it was some of the best training, and it made me realize that it brought out something that I had always had naturally in me, was hospitality, because of the way my parents used to entertain, growing up in Kentucky, it's very Southern, of course, for hospitality. And so it was just a real natural for me.
So you're at Hyatt, and then you kind of make the jump to Brown-Forman. Was that something, I know they sought you out, was that something you were like, oh my gosh, the whiskey, or did you kind of vacillate between leaving the hotel industry?
Well, once I started in the hotel industry, and I think I'm still this way, I thought, what's the long term for me? What do I see down the road? And for the hotel business, it was immediately that I one day wanted to run a hotel, be a general manager. Of course, I would have liked to have done that in Maui, a really great resort, location as a general manager. But a few years in to training, because I was kind of growing and learning as I went, Brown-Forman contacted me and headhunted me because they were starting a new travel department, an event planning department. And of course, it was right up my alley with all my hotel and event planning, convention services background. I knew wine and spirits because I was trained, on the bars at the hotel. And so it was just such an incredible opportunity for me that, of course, I took it and was at Brown-Forman and stayed there 17 years.
Did you always have a love of whiskey, like growing up in Kentucky and being in bourbon country, or, being surrounded by it, did that kind of introduce it to you? Because I know when I started, I was drinking raspberry vodka and tonic, and now I drink
Okay.
So,
well, here, if this makes you feel any better, in my college days, we were drinking, bourbon and Big Red, and we were, just crazy stuff, right? But technically, I really did grow up with it because my mother was a big highball drinker, and my dad, of course, during holiday parties, and he always had his bar open and would show off his Jim Beam decanters and all of those things. So bourbon was always in the eggnog. Just all of those little touches. You just knew the smell of bourbon. Even going downtown Louisville, as a little girl going to the dentist office, you could smell the mash when you went downtown because of some of the distilleries that were downtown at that time. So yes, I think I was, surrounded by not only the hospitality side, but a little bit of the whiskey. But it certainly took off, once I started with Brown-Forman.
yeah, after looking at your resume and after what you just said, it seems like this beautiful evolution into where you are today. So you end up becoming a master bourbon taster. And from there, what made you want to start Bourbon Women? Because I know this organization has grown. You're in, 35 plus states now. How did that start? Because you think about how many women are now in that association, and that all came like one decision.
Mm-hmm. It really did. I guess, looking back, even though I was with Brown-Forman 17 years, I think part of the reason I was successful there is I had a really entrepreneurial spirit. I loved startups. Anytime I was able to work, like Woodford Reserve was brand new. I was the first visitor center director there. It was a startup. And there were so many opportunities that I had, and I knew I had that entrepreneurial spirit. But while I was a master taster, I was sent literally around the world doing and conducting tastings. So back to your story about Bourbon Women, I think what hit me so much was that anytime I gave a tasting, it was predominantly a male audience. And sometimes there would be, a trickle of women that would sit in, but they'd always come up to me after the event and ask questions or, kind of be gun shy to raise their hand. So I knew then, with my Kentucky roots of loving bourbon, seeing it, in the US, how many women really were loyal to it. It's just nobody was talking to them. Nobody was having a conversation with women. So when I started my own company, which was in 2008, then I thought, you know what, if the brands aren't going to market And this was not just at that time Brown-Forman, it was all brands, because the target audience was male, and I thought, I think within my company, there's a place for this, because bourbon women is truly my passion. So I had my own company, Peggy Noe Stevens and Associates, and I thought, I want to do this right. It can't just come from me. And so I pulled together just a phenomenal group of women. And I said, we need to conduct focus groups across Kentucky. And we need to invite a ton of women. And we need to say, hey, if you would join an organization that talked about bourbon, its lifestyle, its culture, its history, its heritage, what would that look like? So we literally asked women what they wanted. And in 2011, Bourbon Women was born.
I love it. I mean, I'm not on your level, but I do host my fair share of bourbon tastings, and even Scotch tastings. I do a lot. I love when I do have those few couple women that come up and ask questions, because it's very rare that they will ask questions. And if it is a male dominated room, I think because they just get a little scared of what people might say or anything. So I love having that comfort. I definitely see where women would have that need. Seeing the amount, I've only been in this industry for about 10 years, but seeing how much it has changed, the people in the seats going from completely male dominated, then a little bit more, maybe one or two women here, and now you're getting whole women sections. And I love telling them, if you love red wine and stuff, whiskey isn't that far away. There's different regions and so many different flavor profiles, but it's kind of fun seeing the new people come into the category and kind of get that. And I think having somebody that looks like them is very important, because it makes them have that little bit of comfort. Because when you're talking about tasting notes, people get a little nervous when you ask them what they're smelling or what they're tasting, because they do.
They don't want to say the wrong thing. And, just to add to that, first of all, you are on my level, because before we went live, I heard you say, it was almost like a quote out of my mouth. You said, I tend to go for the spicier, more robust and higher proof bourbons and whiskeys. And that is a quote out of my book. Because when we started Bourbon Women, we did, and next year, I think, is our 10-year anniversary, believe it or not. But we did all of these blind tastings of women tasting all this different product, hands down. And this was a myth in the industry that women wanted sweeter, lighter, fluffier, whiskeys. So we've proven that women go for the higher proof, more robust and spicier whiskey. So I just wanted to make sure, because not everybody heard you say that, because we weren't live yet, but I heard it clearly. And I think the other thing that it brought is a camaraderie, a friendship. I know we're still just slowly opening up. I did a very small tasting not too long ago, just a couple of weeks ago, to some women from Bourbon Women. And you would have thought that we were long lost friends, because of course we'd been shut down, and they were like, oh my God, we're so happy to be together again. And we're also doing, if anybody's interested who's listening, a Bourbon Women SIP conference virtually, August the 20th through the 22nd. And we have a huge lineup of 18 speakers, 3-day conference virtually. And do you know, it was not even announced. I think it was in the first 24 hours, we had 300 women sign up.
That's amazing.
So it's amazing, because women want to have a conversation about whiskey. They love it just as much as anybody. And, when you can give them the right setting, and we have a huge lineup of female speakers, just go to bourbonwomen.org if you're interested in learning more. But that tells you a lot of the interest, doesn't it? Within 24 hours, 300 women signed up.
It does. I know you guys normally host this event in Kentucky, and I saw last conference that you were on virtually, the Bourbon conference that happened a little bit ago, and that seemed like it had a really good response too. I learned a lot from that conference, and so being able to have this virtually, because not everybody can maybe take the time off work or even
Right.
afford to travel. And now they can attend in a level that a capacity that they may not have been able to before. So
That's
I
right.
think it's kind of an upside to this whole thing.
There is.
because
Yeah,
able to
there
teach
is.
more people. You're
Yeah, I mean,
lowering that barrier to entry.
I agree. And, we're staying very optimistic because, normally you're right. We do it in person and it's in Louisville and we have 300 women, come and they go on workshops and distillery tours and, all of this. But, that's usually about 300 to 350 women. This has now opened up to the world. And so I think thousands of women, by the time we actually have this, because we haven't really started promoting it too much yet. By the time we have this, I think we're going to have thousands of women from across the U.S. who maybe couldn't have made it anyway to the conference, and now they have that opportunity.
It's incredible. Again,
We're excited
it's
about it.
a little bit of a silver lining in this
It
whole
is.
situation that we're in.
It is.
I kind of want to shift gears, but not really.
Sure.
So outside of the whole whiskey world, your company, Peggy Noe Stevens and Associates, you've written a book about professional presence and you do workshops, you are an etiquette teacher. So I want to say, do you have a favorite or most important piece of advice to give a young person starting out in the industry?
I do. Professional presence, and that's why I want everybody to know. I wrote that when I started my company, basically, because it was everything that I have done incorrectly, in my youth. And I wish I had this book, Professional Presence, when I entered the work world, because it would have guided me. And it's, everything from how to present yourself, your personal brand, all of those things. And so it was kind of a labor of love when I wrote that. And then I went on to conduct seminars as part of my company because everybody loved the book so much and companies were calling because, they wanted to train their people better. But the single best advice that I can give, because our industry, the spirits industry, it's about people and it is about relationships. And you know that after being in, I think you said 10 years, right? So it's about relationships. So the greatest etiquette that you could ever give is to make someone feel comfortable with you. Because sometimes people come across really aggressive. Sometimes they come across very intimidating. Sometimes they come across like they don't care. Sometimes they come across that they're lazy. So when you actually put your best personal brand forward, then the rest follows because you're making somebody feel kind of comfortable in your presence, which means they want to do business with you.
I love that. Growing up, my mom had her own business, but her one piece of advice, which stuck with me as much as what you just said will stick with me, it was get to know everybody in the room. I don't care what their job is. You get to know everybody in the room and you greet them the same as you would the person at the top that you're trying to sell to. So something that I've always stuck with me. But I want to say my next question is something that I always get mixed reviews on this. And I think it's something as a woman in the industry. And again, I didn't want to make this too gender focused, but have you received hecklers? And if so, how do you properly handle them? Because I know that I've had people, say somebody comes up to you and I know, well, let me rewind a little bit. I know some people have said that they don't correct people. When they come up to them, they ask them a question or they're telling them something, they don't ever correct them. But for me, when it's like something like maybe it's a Highland single malt scotch and they're saying this to me tastes peaty, even though there's no peat in it. I've heard, yes, you should correct them. No, you shouldn't. To try to be polite and everything. But is there a time to properly correct them? Or maybe they're just, what if they're just testing your knowledge? What's the line there?
So you're talking about a heckler, like while you're conducting a tasting?
Yes.
Essentially? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, here's a famous line that I use. And it doesn't say somebody's wrong, but it doesn't say somebody's right. That's an interesting observation, is what I say. Because sometimes people really believe that they had heard it somewhere. You know, the whiskey industry is also a whole lot about folklore. So, you know, who created the first this, and, you know, so-and-so created this brand. And, you know, there's a lot of historians out there that, of course, do their research and are very buttoned up. But, you know, general public, sometimes they haven't done all the history research as a historian, or they're not making the whiskey like a master distiller. Yet I never underestimate the knowledge of a consumer, because they're savvier than ever. They do study up, they know their brands. And sometimes when I do disagree, if it's not in front of the big audience, you know, I'll say, I appreciate that observation, you know, or, oh, okay, so you have a different perspective than I do. But I never say that they're wrong. You know, I never say that they're wrong, because especially on tasting notes, because everybody's palate is really, really different. Now, if there's someone who continuously interrupts the great time of the rest of the audience, you know, that's maybe when I might get a little savvier and a little saltier.
Interesting. I know there's been a couple people in some of my tastings that have really tried to test me, and there's some days where you're like, okay, I got this, and then there's other days where you're just like, oh, one more time, one more time.
I understand, but you know, my etiquette instructor that taught me how to become an etiquette instructor, she said, time wounds, all heals.
Yeah. You have to take it in, take a moment. Okay.
Right.
All right.
That's right.
It's just one person.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, for every one of those people, there's 10 great people behind them that makes it fun. Yeah.
Well, I want to take this moment to introduce our second guest for today. I know she's probably had a heckler or two behind the stick where she's at. So I'd like to introduce to you, my second guest is Shelby Minnix from Detroit, Michigan. She is not only a certified executive bourbon steward, she manages a well-known bar out of Detroit and has become a mentor in her city. So welcome to the show, Shelby Minnix.
Hi, thank you, Lacey.
Hi, Shelby. So Shelby's here. She's actually going to make us a cocktail or two. But first, I want to know, how did you get into hospitality? I know you're actually not from Detroit. Yeah. So how'd you kind of end up being this person in the city?
My story is not that far off from Peggy's, actually. I was studying at Purdue University, and I got a job at a local prime rib whiskey bar in Wabash, Indiana. And I was there for almost 3 years. And during that time, I went from 19-year-old to 20-year-old, worked my way up, became a bartender. And there was one point where this bottle behind the bar, it was these wings on the back, and I'm like, this bottle's pretty, what is this? And the owner of the restaurant's like, oh, that's Angel's Envy. And I was like, what is that? And he's like, bourbon, you should try it. And I tried it, and I was like, oh my gosh. And it was that Kentucky hug that I fell in love with. And so I researched what it was, what is this port finish, what does that mean? And then the history was Lincoln Henderson. And I was like, wow, this is more than just alcohol in a bottle. There's a story involved in this. And then from there, I just kind of branched out, and then I worked at a different whiskey bar, and then I ran another whiskey bar in Indiana, and did cocktails. And I dropped out of my college degree because I love the bar business and the people that we meet and the opportunities that I was given, more than sitting in an office. That was my destiny, and now I have way more fun than ever I could imagine. And when I was 24, I seeked out bourbon certification program. There's got to be something. There's Cicerone and there's sommelier. There's got to be something for whiskey. So I went to Louisville and did my State and Thief executive bourbon steward. I was the only woman, I believe. It was class 3 that they've ever done. And sitting next to me was the people who started Aroma Academy in the United States. And so I got not even trained, but also I got to make really good friends with the guys that came out with those aromatic kits. It's based out of Europe, but the 2 gentlemen are from Louisville. And I became friends with them and did some traveling with them. And ever since then, like my whole entire career, like has just bloomed, like working with Lush Life and traveling and doing this with you and like moving to a different city. Sugar House is one of the coolest jobs I've ever had, and I'm really fortunate. It's just crazy. Just taking that one little step, like, oh, because of that bottle and that one time trying it, like totally took me on a different tangent in my life.
So before that, were you drinking bourbon at all?
No, you're talking about drink of choice. It was cranberry and Jack Daniels, and I called it crack for short. That was definitely I really enjoy cranberry juice, and that was something I grew up with. And so I was like, oh, whiskey and crack, that's a badass drink, you know? So that was it.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So how long have you been at Sugar House now?
3 years this year.
3 years. I know you competed at Speed Rack. I know we're kind of in a weird time, but any future things down in the pipeline?
Last competition was Speed Rack. Before that, I did World Class. But I mean, I love the competitions, but I'm just so exhausted. They're so exhausting. Yes, and maybe. I mean, I'll do them. I mean, if it's something, I have to be inspired, and I have to have like I feel like some kind of like connection or something with the product. Like there's certain products or brands that I don't particularly like working with, so I just choose not to do competitions with them. But yeah, I will. Just might feel a little motivated.
Well, I'm glad that you decided to be inspired by our brand today. So what are you going to be making for us today?
So the first drink I'm making you is actually inspired by Peggy's book and my mom. At the same time, I was reading and I was like, oh, I already know what I'm going to make. This cocktail is called Cindy's Tea. And growing up, my mom would always make peach sun tea. And Peggy mentions in her book that to take advantage of the produce that is available during the season. So I'm not going to make you all boozy drinks. Like these are seasonal appropriate, easy to do at home. Less than 5 ingredients. So the first thing, I'm going to get some clear ice. You can use like your refrigerator ice, or in this case, I have large format. Right, it's loud. Then I'm going to start with a couple dashes of your classic aromatic Angostura bitters. And then the next ingredient, I infuse star anise into honey syrup. It's 2 to 1. If you don't want to use star anise, you can also use clove. I'm just doing a bar spoon. And then the star of the show would be the double oak bourbon. It is 90 proof. It is finished in American oak cask and then Oloroso sherry. So I'm going to give this a quick little stir. So I basically just made just an old fashioned with anise honey syrup. And then where the peach comes in is I froze peach tea in the large format cubes. So what we have here, and then anybody can get these online. They're just like these little ice trays, and you just pour peach tea. You can make sun tea and pour it in there, or just do it over the stove top, whatever's easiest.
So I'm not a tea drinker. When you're making peach porch tea, are you just putting slices in there and letting it marinate?
That way, or you can do tea bags, and you just make a concentrate. So like double up on the amount of tea bags than you would on a normal like 8-ounce cup. So if it says for like 1 for every 8 ounce, you're gonna do 2 for that same amount. But like you're making a tea concentrate. Can you see it? I'm so far away. And then on top, you can do a lemon zest, some citrus. I also have mint here. So as you drink this cocktail, it's going to change a little bit as that peach comes through. And that's that. Cindy's tea.
Oh, I wish I was there to take that glass. Love the tea angle.
Cheers, Shelby. Thank you for making that. I don't think I've ever had a cocktail where they use a flavored ice cube like that. Outside of, I've had Brugal 1888 rum with a coconut water ice ball, but I don't think I've ever had anything on that level.
It's
Well,
something.
I just wanted to ask too, I have done ice cubes, with mint in them. I've done ice cubes, lemonade, but not tea. And that was a great tip that you double the concentration of the tea.
Right, because as it dilutes, instead of watering down your drink, you're just kind of allowing it to be still complex, but changing flavor.
That's brilliant.
Thank you.
That's a great party tip.
Party tip, yes.
Laughing because if you haven't already read Peggy's book, we'll talk about it in a second, but she's got a lot of great party tips in there. But before we move on, Shelby, do you have a Venmo? So anybody who wants to go home and try to make this cocktail, they can give you a tip for the expertise that you just kind of gave us.
I do. It is my first name, Shelby, and then hyphen my last name, which is Minnix. So, or you can
that is MINNIX.
MINNIX as an X-ray.
We'll drop it in the chat, and like I said, throw a little tip for our expertise. We really appreciate that. You gave us something that I've never seen before. So I look forward to what you have coming up next. But right now we're going to move back to Peggy. And like I said, we're going to talk about Peggy's book. She wrote this incredible book. It is called Which Fork Do I Use with My Bourbon? And I know I've said on the show plenty of times, I'm not the kind of person that's going to make simple syrups, stuff like that, just because I don't use them a lot. This book is going to save me once this lockdown is over and it's time to have a party, because this thing is so detailed. If you've never hosted a party before, if you've never been into bourbon or anything like that, Peggy goes into real detail with this. But Peggy, I know you wrote this with Susan Riegler. How did this book come about?
Yeah, well, I have to comment first. I love all your markers holding different pages. I'm dying to know which ones you did, but we'll talk about that later. Well, Susan Riegler and I have been friends for quite some time. She was the past president of Bourbon Women Association. She was a former food critic for the Louisville Courier Journal newspaper. She's written, travel books, bourbon books, etc. So we are longtime friends. But what we also do together, we write for American Whiskey Magazine, and we're the whiskey reviewers. So I probably had this book in my head because it's, based on what you've already, had me tell about my career. Started in the hotel background, went into whiskey, planned events. I thought, one day I'm going to write a book on how to do all of this, because what I learned through doing seminars to the public on entertaining or bourbon tastings is that the public really wants all of the kind of the trade secrets. How do we do what we do? And it was very important for me to make sure that, consumers knew you don't have to be an expert to entertain with bourbon. Let us teach you the tricks of the trade, the techniques that we've learned along the way. And so when I told Susan, I think I was 2 years into my business and I was like, I really wanted to write this book, but I haven't gotten it off the ground, and life took over and business took over and, everything. And so about 1.5 years ago, I guess it's been that long ago. Yeah, maybe almost 2 years. I said, hey, would you want to partner with this? Because I think if we wrote it together, you have such a respect for me, vice versa, and we could just share all our knowledge and put it together and work faster than we would by ourselves. And she was like, absolutely, I'd love to do it, because she has a real affinity, also for entertaining and teaching. So I have to tell you, there was very little quote unquote research that we even had to do. It all poured out of us. It was all of our experiences. And it's been so much fun. And I have to tell you, you might think it was crazy to launch an entertaining book during a shutdown, right? In isolation, but it's actually been a real highlight because people have all over the US have said, oh my gosh, I've enjoyed this so much. This is almost prepping me for the time that I have my family back over, or when I have a party again, I'm going to be ready. So we've had a lot of fun with it.
I just said, and I don't know if anybody heard me, but it's actually kind of brilliant to launch it at this time. Not that you did that intentionally, but thinking about it, you can't really have these big parties, so maybe you do these small little tastings.
That's what's happening. Yeah, right.
And this book is so detailed. I mean, for everybody out there in internet land, if you have never done anything like this, I mean, she goes through the guest list. If you pick this up, you won't need a party planner because she has tablescapes. I want to say I highlighted one of the things on here was you have garnishes picked out by their seasonality. So you can literally just go in here and say, oh, okay, well, apricots are in season May, June. We'll throw those on there. And then it goes into tablescapes, like how to build it, whether you want to do a whiskey tasting. It's pretty incredible, the level of detail that went into the book. How long did it take you to write?
Well, like I said, I think it's been about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years that Susan and I were just kind of talking about it. And she was going to just help me get it organized. And then it was like, when we decided, let's just write this thing together. It went very quickly. I mean, I bet we were done in 6 months writing it. The hardest part is actually laying it out and all the photography. It's a very visual book, as you noticed, very visual, and laying out all of the entertaining photos. So it was really a great experience to work side by side with him as well. And all the shots, if they're not done in my home, then they have been done at an event or party that I've been to. We also have some photos of different distilleries too.
The photography in here is incredible. And seeing some of I'll try to hold it up. I don't know if anybody can really see it, but look, if anybody can see this plate, I mean, the level, all the different things in here. And I think the way that you have it set up, especially like this page that I have open to, it's the typical bourbon aroma and flavor descriptors. So it's a huge list of herbal things. So you can actually start to classify these things that you know is like, so maybe I know what black tea tastes like. Now I can classify that as herbal. And it kind of gives you these different levels. So even besides just the party planning aspect, I think if you're new to bourbon, it kind of walks you through that, because I know you go through the definition of what bourbon is and everything, but it's the flavors and aromas, because I think some people, especially when they're new to the category, they really struggle with that to get past the initial like alcohol burn. And then once they try to, vanilla and caramel, I feel like are very easy to pick up. But beyond that, when you start saying like banana or, something that may be a little bit more obscure or harder to pick up, having something like this to walk you through is pretty incredible. Do you have a favorite pairing in this book, or like a go-to pairing? Mine is, I was telling you earlier, I like higher or robust rye. So I like to do rye. And this is actually chocolate that has a little bit of, I thought they were cocoa nibs. It's actually coffee bean in them.
Ah, interesting. Yeah. I tend to like layers of flavors. And so I'm really into hors d'oeuvres. And there's one in there, I of course don't have the page memorized, but it was a crostini. It was almost like a waffle cone is what it was. It was like a flat waffle cone, and it had blue cheese and blackberries. And then we drizzled honey on the top of it. And I think I might have had that maybe with a Booker's. It was a very strong bourbon that I had it with, because blue cheese is so stout. Yeah. So when I can bring out kind of robust flavors to match the whiskey, those are my favorite ones. There's another one that I remember that we did was cornbread with shredded barbecue. That was a great food pairing for me.
When you have somebody who's new to the category, are there some things that you suggest that they try to kind of help expand their palate, whether it be chocolate, dried nuts? Do you have a preference between fresh fruit or dry fruit, or?
Well, that's a great question. And what I normally like to do, honestly, is just fix them a cocktail, because I think that's the best entry. You know, when you just introduce somebody, you know, and you want them to like bourbon and you say, here, let me pour this neat down it. Tell me if you like it. You know, they immediately shy away because you've kind of forced them into something bigger than what they're used to. And so what I like to do is just give them a really nice, clean cocktail that's not too sugary, not too sweet, not too anything, but they can taste some of the bourbon and it's very complimentary. So then when they taste that, they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that bourbon could taste so good, you know, because it's a well-made cocktail. Then I say, well, hey, why don't I try pouring you a little bourbon, and I'll pick a low proof, like an Old Forester 86 or a Basil Hayden or something, just very entry level. And I'll have them, you know, do a couple steps of nosing it very softly to the side. And then when I have them taste it, then I'll have them swallow the whiskey, but actually blow out like that, because it blows out that alcohol so that they get the flavor. So when you kind of peel it back and take baby steps, and then, you know, until they get used to it, little by little, and I think all of our palates are like this, no matter if it's a food, no matter if it's a whiskey, we tend to graduate and you get a little bit higher proof, a little bit more robust flavor. You know, it's just like the blue cheese I mentioned. You know, you might have liked Gouda. Now you're into, let's do it, Manchego or whatever, and then eventually blue cheese. So your evolution of your palate happens.
And I think you mentioned that in the book, you were
do.
using American cheese, and then
I did. You remember that story?
Gouda cheese,
Yes.
and you're like, wow, this is really cheese.
Right, right.
It's crazy how evolution happens. Do you normally start with a wheated bourbon or a high rye bourbon if you have somebody who's new to the category?
You know, I would like Maker's Mark, for example, to me is the perfect wheated bourbon to start with. I think that makes total sense because it's a lighter body, still great flavor, but a lighter body. And then the ryes, of course, are spicier. You know, so I would do a high rye for maybe their third taste, and maybe a more corn forward for their second taste.
I love watching people respond to things, especially when they're new to the category, because sometimes you get somebody who maybe never even had bourbon before, but they still prefer maybe a like higher rye versus a wheated.
Right.
But when you find out what they eat, they tend to have spicier foods or high pepper or something like that, that kind of leads you to know. It's almost like you need a questionnaire. Like, what are normal
It is.
foods you
I
eat?
agree
What
with
are
you.
your previous experiences?
Right. And it's funny because when I do kind of a mass bourbon tasting where it's a bar that's set up and, you know, several products are in front of me and, you know, the audience, and this was in the good old days when we had big events, you know, that they would come up and they'd say, oh, what should I try? And I said, are you a sweet person? Are you a spicy person? You know, do you like grain flavor? You know, I'd ask them what kind of flavors they like. I never got them to the whiskey until I really understood, you know, if they say, oh yeah, I like spicy food. Then I knew I was going to give them a rye, you know, something with a high rye, you know, or if they say, oh, I really love sweet, then I'm going to give them a real caramel whiskey. So I like to find out their flavor profile.
I'm going to use that because what I currently do is I will ask them, you know, if I'm serving single malt for the night, you know, maybe they've never had single malt. So instead of asking their flavor profile, which I will now do, thank you very much, I would ask them what they currently drink. Because if you're an Irish whiskey drinker or, you know, a bourbon drinker or something like that, or even cognac, I'm going to put you in a different category depending, just because with Scotch, you have so many different flavor profiles. So
Right.
now I will go a little bit more in depth with that. But speaking of that, do you drink any Scotch since you are this big bourbon lady?
You know, it's very rare that I will drink Scotch only because of the business I'm in, of course. But at the same time, I do a lot, I mean, just for pleasure, but I do a lot of Scotch tastings with Susan when we're doing whiskey reviews. So I review Scotch when it's sent to us. And these are blind tastings. We have no idea what's going to appear on our doorstep, if you will. And then we find out when the magazine comes out, what we're taking. All we know when we receive our samples is what category. Is it bourbon, scotch, a rye, a port? What is it exactly? So on occasion, of course, when I'm with friends, in New York or, places that really have a great Scotch bar, then we indulge. And, I got to tell you, because you and I were talking about cigars, right?
Mhm.
I'm a big Ardbeg fan.
Interesting.
I mean, as far as like a really robust.
I was going to ask you if you're more Highland or if you are more peaty, smoky kind of person.
Kind of peaty, smoky. I would say.
Well, I know we briefly talked about this, but this is one you'll have to try. Highland Park. It's a touch of smoke. 17 years old, but it's also finished with a Rioja Spanish wine cask.
Oh,
so it has
that sounds great.
Beautiful balance to it. So this one is probably, I'm a huge Highland Park fan. I told you when I started in the industry, I drank raspberry vodka and tonic. But now I like smoky Highland Park. And when I'm drinking American whiskey, the Noble Oak Rye is kind of my go-to because I've been drinking this for so long. I'll tell you a quick Brown Forman story. When I first started drinking whiskey, I was with an ambassador in Louisville. We were going to go to the distillery. And he's like, Lacey, they have birthday bourbon behind the bar. And I was like, oh, yeah. I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know. I was fresh to the industry. And so I go up there and they pour us these 2 glasses of whiskey and I go to try it. And I was like, whew, I need some ginger ale in there. And he looked at me and just turned around and walked away.
Now I can picture it now. Yeah, I can picture it.
Now we laugh about it, but also back then you could get birthday bourbon very easily, but now it's pretty hard. But
well, you have piqued my interest on the one that you just held up.
Well, maybe we can help you with that.
Yeah.
But I will say it's kind of crazy, looking over your resume and seeing how your palate has expanded. And again, this book is so in depth. Again, if you're looking to kind of experience anything, expand your palate, you have everything kind of written down between simple food pairings, cheese options, more advanced. Again, I've been in this industry for a while, and I know that there's things that I'm going to be able to take out of this. Even some of the entrees. There's some really good entrees in here. Do you have a favorite?
Well, it was never meant to be a cookbook, right? It wasn't, but Susan and I felt compelled because we were sharing our favorites, our techniques, the way we do things. And so we had to put in our favorite food, and we also had to put in our favorite cocktails. And so I would say it's Granny Hunter's beef tenderloin that I got from my mother-in-law, actually, and cooked it for years and years and years at Christmas and special occasions. And it is foolproof, it is flavorful, and it is great with bourbon. Great with bourbon.
Well, I know you didn't intend it to be a cookbook, but I find it to be very helpful, especially, again, we're probably going to be doing a lot more dinner parties and having people over.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And keeping it kind of, close knit to your little, lockdown bubble. But again, you have it so well mapped out. Pairing everything. I know there's sometimes I work with smaller bars that maybe haven't done a whiskey tasting. And even I'll probably say, before I ask you my last question, I will say one of my favorite things in the book is this flavor scale.
Oh, my intensity scale.
Yes.
Yeah.
I find it very helpful. So for those of you who, I don't know if there's a sheen on it, but it goes through all the different flavors. So basic, bread yeast, earthy, herbal, spices, and then it gives you those things that we previously talked about that she had listed down, whether it's vanilla icing, and then it lays out the level of intensity.
Right.
So if maybe you've never cooked with bourbon or anything like that, again, that was one thing it kind of blew my mind because I never thought about that, and it really maps it out. And I think having that laid out like that really kind of makes those two wires go together. You know, you're like having that aha moment, like, okay, I get it.
Well, thank you for that. I have to tell you, I came out with the intensity scale many years ago. When I started my company, I was still conducting tastings and kind of doing my own thing. And I thought, I need a teaching tool, because a lot of times, consumers don't, it's really all food flavors, essentially, right, that we're dealing with. And when I say, hey, what do you taste in the bourbon? Sometimes a consumer would answer, I taste sweet. And I'll say, well, what kind of sweet? And they'll say, well, I don't know, just sweet. And I said, really focus on the memory of that sweetness. Is it a sugar? And they'll go, yeah, it's more like a sugar. I said, is it a white sugar, a light brown sugar, a dark sugar, a maple syrup, a sorghum? And they'll go, oh, wow, it's like syrup. It's like syrup. It's that sweet. It's like syrup. And I'll say, okay. So the intensity of sweet is really high for this bourbon. And it just all started coming together for people when they could say, oh, I taste apple. Well, is it a green apple, a yellow apple, a red apple? Because they all have different flavors and they all have different levels of intensity. And once you know that, it's the gateway to food pairings. Gateway to food pairings.
It's very in depth, and I can see how this can, a lot of people can't ever, like you said, put their finger on exactly what they're tasting. And this is kind of like a map to, explore your palate and put words to the flavors that you're kind of trying. And I think that goes for food and cocktails,
Oh, absolutely. Cocktails are food flavors, the mixers and the, bitters and all of those things. So it translates for sure.
Learning how to balance things out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It is great. Well, speaking about cocktails, let's invite Shelby back. She's got one more cocktail for us. So Shelby, what are you making for us?
The next one is with the Double Oak Rye. It is a 96 proof, originally American oak barrels, and then finished in port wine, which I'm really excited about. Because of sentimental value, like the first whiskey that I ever really actually tried neat was the Angel's Envy, but this is excellent. I like it. I drink it as much as you do. Last night I think I drank all this bottle, but the next one is also used with fresh ingredients that are available at the moment. So I'm working with plums. This is going to be a shaken drink, and I'm starting with just molasses bitters that I actually got in Louisville. And I'm just trying to remember where I got these. I love molasses.
Yum.
A couple drops of that. And then the plum reduction. So I juice plums and then reduce it down into a pan. But this cocktail also would work if you put chunks of plum in a blender and turn it into like a bourbon smoothie. It could work either way. I know reducing a plum reduction seems a little labor intensive. 3/4 ounce.
Bourbon smoothie. I love whiskey and ice cream together. It's a beautiful.
I'll get the blender out the next time you're at Sugar House, and we can make all of these. Like turn all of them into smoothies. Do a peach tea smoothie, and then 1 ounce of lime juice. Sorry, lemon, not lime. I haven't bartended for a couple of days.
So for those people that don't know, Michigan actually got some of the bars had to close back up because of the virus, but where Shelby works, they've been doing to-go cocktails.
Correct.
Seems, you can actually get whiskey, almost like whiskey flight. So I know Shelby has a great palate as well. She helps pick a lot of the single barrels, and those are actually available for to-go right now.
Correct. Little samples. Then I'm putting this on crushed ice, so I'm only going to shake this for a short amount of time just to chill it. And I'm going to fix my tool. So this is just a plum lemon port rye sour.
Mm.
And then I have a couple of herbs over here. I'm using thyme. I think thyme works best with the flavors of the double oak rye. because of the toffee and the allspice. And that's it. All plumbed up.
Shelby, what does it taste like?
What does it taste like? It's like a juicy plum, spicy, almost like end of summer going into fall. That's what it tastes like. Sour.
One of our coworkers just said he's sad that he didn't get to see this show before his mom moved out of Detroit.
Aww.
Next time we have a company party, Suri, you'll have to go to her bar with us.
Love that.
Well, that is a beautiful drink. Again, hit Shelby with a tip on Venmo. It is Shelby-Minnix at Venmo, and we're putting that in the chat. We are getting to closing time. I could stay here with you ladies all day, but we only have a 1 hour show. So I want to thank you both for coming on. You're incredible people and leaders in your industry, and I'm just really glad that you guys took the time out and the energy to put into our show today. So thank you, Shelby and Peggy. You can visit Peggy at her website. It's peggynoestevens.com. She's also on Instagram and Facebook. Go pick up her book. It is Which Fork Do I Use with My Bourbon? You won't regret it. And Shelby is on Instagram and Facebook. She is at S Minnix on Instagram and Shelby Minnix on Facebook. And if you're in Detroit, stop in, buy some to-go cocktails, give her a little love. And the reason we are all here, again, this is a fundraiser, so please, if you enjoyed the show, go to YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit like, and give us a little donation so that we can double match that and give some meals to some people in need. Thank you again for being on the show, and tune in for our next show. We have a schedule up on Instagram, or just hit the notifications button and you'll see our shows as they come out. So thanks again, everybody. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Digital Speakeasy.
Thank you.
Ladies.